thank you guys for joining us tonight. For everyone that's here in Zoom with us and for everyone that's joining us on Facebook. Tonight we're going to be talking about all kinds of different species. So it'll be a little bit shorter per species, but we still have a lot of great information. So tonight we're going to be talking about Oryx, Ibex, Barbary, I believe I've spelled that wrong, I apologize, and Javelina. But I wanted to remind everybody that time is running really short. The deadline to apply for the draw is next Wednesday, a week from today at 5 p.m. So if you haven't done your applications already, make sure and get that done this weekend or tonight or tomorrow. Just get them done sooner rather than later. The draw does shut off right at 5 p.m. So if you are in the process of submitting an application at 5 p.m. next Wednesday, it will kick you out. So everyone that has applied already, as of 5 p.m. tonight, you qualified for the application or for the incentive programs. So we will get that information out after the draw is complete and we have selected those names. And then for those of you that are hunting Barbary, Ibex, Javelina, Oryx, or if you're a trapper, you have until April 7th to get your harvest reports in to be considered for the draw. So again, next Wednesday at 5 p.m., don't miss that deadline. And then April 7th, for those of you that haven't done your harvest reports yet, those have to be in. But like I said, tonight we will be talking about some of our exotic species and Javelina, because I don't think I can say Javelina are an exotic species, but we will be talking about Oryx, Ibex, Barbary, and Javelina. And I'm really excited tonight. We have Nicole Tatman on with us. She's the Big Game Program Manager. And Nicole, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you know way more about you and what you do every day than I do.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everybody. I wish I could see your faces, but since I cannot, it's nice for you to join us this evening. So my name's Nicole Tatman. I'm the Big Game Program Manager, as Tristana mentioned. So I oversee my team and myself oversee a lot of the ungulate programs across the state. So those are the mammals that have hooves that we can all hunt. So we are tasked with coming up with biological management recommendations for all of those species across the state. So that's deer, elk, pronghorn, all the exotic species. So Oryx, Ibex, Barbary sheep, Javelina. I hope I'm not forgetting any, but those are all the species that myself and my team cover. So we fly surveys across the state to collect biological information, or we look at hunter harvest data to help us come up with management recommendations to make sure that all of these species are sustained for future generations. And if there's anything that we see in this data that looks troubling or puzzling, we can implement some research projects or do some more investigation on what is the reasons for some problems with some particular herds, for example. So that's in a nutshell what I do for the department. So I've been working in this role for 6 years now, and prior to that, for 3 years, I was the elk biologist. So I've got 9 years on with the agency now, and I'm a native New Mexican, so it's really nice to be working in my home state and learning a whole lot more about it as each day goes by.
Absolutely. And in the last few weeks, we've talked to just about everyone on your team and then a few people who aren't on your team. But, they've talked a lot about how much time they get to spend out in the field, 40 to 60% of their time out doing surveys and captures and monitoring and all kinds of different stuff. But are you out in the field as much as they are, or do you have to be in the office a little bit more with administrative duties?
Yeah, I get to be in the office a little bit more than my team does, but I do still get to get out in the field quite a bit. I would say less than half of my time is spent out in the field, but they're the experts in their respective species, so I want to make sure that they have the tools that they need, and sometimes that means making sure that the budgets are in line or working with some of our federal partners behind the scenes to make sure that everything runs smoothly. So I don't quite get to spend as much time as they do in the field, but it's okay because I still get to be involved in those projects some.
That's awesome. And I forgot a couple of housekeeping things. I apologize. If those of you that are here in Zoom, if you have questions, throw them into the Q&A. We will do our best to get to as many questions tonight. We already have one, and Nicole, it'll be a totally different one because I did not set you up at all for this one, but I think you probably know how to answer it. For those of you that are on Facebook, I will be monitoring the chat and I will plug in those questions as they are applicable. And we do have our Spanish translator in the participant list. So if somebody needs to speak in Spanish or would prefer to speak in Spanish, we can bring Darren in to translate for us. So just wanted to let you know we have that option available. But Nicole, I wanted to jump right in, and I seem to be pretty obsessed with Oryx since I moved to New Mexico. It's something I've never seen before before moving down here. But can you tell us a little bit about the history in New Mexico, and where do they come from and why are they here?
Yeah, so oryx are near and dear to my heart too. They're the first big game animal that I was able to successfully harvest. So they come from Africa originally. They have, as you all know from Tristana's photo there, they're pretty unique coloration on their face and on their underside. They have a really interesting looking tail. They range in weight from about 200 to 450 pounds. Both the males and females have horns. They breed year round and the females give birth to a single calf each time. And after a few months, interestingly, the calves kind of look identical to the adults. They look just sort of like miniature adult oryx, which can kind of throw you when you're in the field if you just see a group of juveniles. They look like large animals, but if you get up next to them, they're about the size of a German Shepherd dog. Oryx are adapted to very dry climates, and they can go quite some time without water. In New Mexico, they can grow horns up to about 40 inches. That's as big as they get here, but in their native home range in Africa, they can get up to about 50 inches. So in New Mexico, they were introduced in the 50s and 60s. The Game Commission at that time was interested in bringing some exotic species to the state of New Mexico to establish in different ranges across the state where they thought there weren't as many wild ungulates as there could be. And so they had some trials with various species. Orcs were one of them. Some other species were kudu, Siberian ibex, the Persian ibex, which we also have. But oryx adapted very well to the environment in New Mexico, and were introduced onto the missile range, I believe, in the 70s. So they offer a pretty unique opportunity in the state. Their natural predators in Africa are the lion, leopards, and hyenas. So they have a very interesting physiology and adaptations to being prey animals for those really large African predators. But in New Mexico, their primary predator is mountain lions, and mountain lions certainly do not limit oryx numbers on range or off range. More than likely, oryx calves can be preyed upon by mountain lions, but it's going to take a really large tom to be able to take down an adult oryx.
So in New Mexico, then their probably biggest predator is hunters.
Oh yes, absolutely, by far, yeah.
I found it interesting. I've learned in the last year that they're just built differently than animals that come from here in the United States, and their vitals sit a little bit different. Their spine is a lot lower. They're just overall built different than what we're used to here.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you kind of take them apart to see their organs sit like very low in their chest cavity compared to deer, what you would see in deer or elk. And that is an adaptation for lion predation, like to hide those or have those vital organs kind of tucked up in there so that they can't be punctured by claws or teeth or whatever.
So interesting. It's so different than anything that I've experienced before. So they're still my biggest obsession, I think, here in New Mexico. But you mentioned you can find them particularly on White Sands Missile Range, but I know there are some that are off range as well. And so where can you find them in the state?
So they're going to be concentrated on White Sands Missile Range. That's where the densest population is going to be, and the majority of them will be found. But in areas adjacent to White Sands Missile Range, there are oryx that kind of spill off of the range and sort of disperse a bit. And the success rates actually for those hunts are pretty good. So for that reason, we don't actually survey Oryx off of White Sands Missile Range, but we do have that index data from our hunter harvest reports that kind of tells us that there are definitely Oryx off of the missile range and certainly a huntable population of them.
Okay. And I know there's some on private land that's around that range as well.
Yeah, they'll be on both public and private land adjacent to the missile range for sure.
And they tend to stay kind of in that valley. They don't really move too far off the missile range, right?
Yeah, they don't move especially far off of the missile range. So for folks that have an off-range hunt, focusing kind of near the missile range is going to be your best bet. They definitely are they're not as much of a solitary animal, so they certainly want to be with others of their own species. So they're gonna be close to the missile range, yeah.
Okay. And about how many do we have in the states?
We estimate that we have between 4 and 6,000 in the state. And I'm going to couch that in the fact that we survey the missile range, but we do not survey elsewhere. And so the 4 to 6,000 is sort of our best estimate of what we do have. But I'd be willing to bet that's mostly on the missile range. So I'd be willing to bet that it's maybe on the high end of that, just because we don't survey off of the range, and there are definitely animals there.
Interesting. Your audio goes in and out just a little bit, but
Okay, I'll get real close.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And one of the things I find really interesting about the oryx hunting in New Mexico is there's several different structures to it. There's the once in a lifetime, there's the broken horn, there's the off range, the military, there's all kinds of different stuff. So can you break those down, maybe starting with the once in a lifetime, since I think it's the most coveted tag, but what are the differences and how should somebody go about applying if they haven't applied already?
Yeah, so the once in a lifetime, as you said, is definitely the highest coveted. Are you hearing me better now?
Yes.
Great. Um, so the once in a lifetime is just what it sounds like. You can only draw that tag once in your lifetime. It is going to be a tag that is for the missile range itself. And so it's going to be a weekend hunt with usually a Friday being a day for checking in with the missile range, going over some safety protocols, etc. But it's a very successful hunt. Most people, 80 to 90% of people, are successful over the weekend in harvesting an oryx. It's a very unique opportunity, and people rate the hunt really high. So usually, when we ask you how would you rate your hunt from a 1 to 5 scale, at 5 being the best, a lot of people rate it as a 5 out of 5. So that's the once in a lifetime hunt. You can only obviously put in for that once, or draw that once in your lifetime. I have not drawn that particular hunt yet. So when I put in for oryx, I always have those hunts as my first choice for once in a lifetime. Broken horn is another hunt. So that is for people who have drawn their anybody can apply for it. But it is not a once in a lifetime tag. So the people that have already drawn once in a lifetime oryx hunts can put in for that as well. Then we have off-range hunts. Those are off of the missile range. They're usually a month-long hunt that you can go out at any point in that month and look for oryx outside of the missile range. You won't be allowed to access the missile range itself. That is also not a once in a lifetime hunt. And I should mention that the once in a lifetime and broken horn hunts typically exclusively occur over the weekend. So the goal of White Sands Missile Range is definitely to support the Department of Defense and provide a place for training missions to occur. So the hunts have to be kind of squeezed in on the weekends. So those once in a lifetime and broken horn hunts happen on the weekends. We also have private land hunts. So those are for private land only. We work, or folks that are interested in those, or private landowners who are interested in those particular hunts, can work with the Southwest area out of Las Cruces, that Game and Fish office there, to get those authorizations and hunts exclusively for private land. We also have some interesting special military hunts. So they're for injured service men and women. They're we draw up to 10 of those a year, and they're their own special drawing. So they are not the you wouldn't put in for them in the regular draw. They have their own special draw that happens in the summer. So in June, we announced that people can put in for these particular hunts. I think the criteria is 50% disabled veteran. And so those folks can put in for this special hunt in June, and then it is drawn in, I believe, in July. And so that is also a pretty interesting hunt that does happen on the missile range itself. And it's pretty well supported by Department of Game and Fish staff as well as White Sands staff to help those injured service members get an Oryx down and be successful.
Yes. Okay, on that one, a question that came in, if you get a once in a lifetime hunt, can you still apply for that returning overseas Iraq, Afghanistan hunt?
Oh, that is a good question. You've stumped me.
I'll keep looking. I was looking it up as you were talking because I wasn't sure, but I'll keep looking.
Yeah.
And then another question that came in on the Oryx hunt, I believe most of them, you said some of them are going to be a month long for the off-range hunts. And then most of them on White Sands, or if not all of them, will be a 3-day hunt. It'll be a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And sometimes at least half of the day on Friday is sort of an orientation with rules and what you can and can't do.
And I know we always get questions every year because it just happens that as you said, the primary function of White Sands Missile Range is to support the functions and the job that they have to do there, not necessarily hunting. So it can easily cancel a day that you were going to be in the field, and now their missions have taken over and you can't hunt that day. But they do everything they can to make sure you have the most successful and an enjoyable hunt possible.
Yeah, for sure. And they really work behind the scenes to make sure that those hunts are still very successful and enjoyable for hunters. And even if that means you can't hunt, the rest of Friday, there's still really high success rates on Saturday, Sunday. So
great. And if you get the once in a lifetime, can you shoot a broken horn, or do you have to have a broken horn to harvest a broken horn?
The once in a lifetime license is valid for any Oryx at all. So it can be a broken horn, it can have funky horns. Some of the more interesting animals I've seen on the missile range do have really weird looking horns, like they grow downwards or like kind of in a circular pattern. So yeah, with the once in a lifetime tag, you can harvest any animal. Broken horn, no horns, anything.
Perfect. And can you walk through? I saw a comment on Facebook. It's been a couple of months now, and somebody was interested in putting in for a once in a lifetime Oryx and was really worried about the amount of paperwork that you had to fill out to do the background checks to qualify to go on White Sands Missile Range. And I messaged that person and was like, it's not that big of a deal. It's totally worth it. But can you talk a little bit about that process of, if you're drawn, what do you have to do to get onto White Sands Missile Range?
Yeah, so because they are Department of Defense and they have sensitive items and places, you have to do a background check in order to get onto the missile range. So when you draw the tag, whether it's a broken horn or once in a lifetime, there's a process that you have to go through to then be permitted access onto the missile range. And that is a background check. It's not overly burdensome, to be honest. They essentially run a background check on you to make sure there's nothing strange that comes up. And then you are allowed on the missile range. But that background check obviously takes some effort, staff time wise, and looking up all that information. So for that reason, the missile range has a $150 fee for accessing the range, just because it takes them a lot of time and effort to go through all that background check for the hundreds of hunters that access the range a year.
And that's for you and anyone that goes with you. So you can be accompanied by up to 3 people, if I recall, and they all have to go through the same background check.
They do, yeah, but they don't have to pay their own separate fee.
It's just one for the whole group. Okay. And then on the broken horn hunts, do they cost the same as a once in a lifetime for your application?
Yeah, they do. So it's just one fee for Oryx. Yes.
Perfect. And are disabled veteran tags for residents only?
They are not. No. So anybody can put in for those tags, and it's a random drawing.
I think I have one more question that I need to double check Facebook, and I'm still looking up the one question that stopped us. Would it also apply to a non once in a lifetime? Let me double check. For the broken horn hunt, as far as broken horn hunt portion goes, as far as the broken horn portion of the discussion goes, would it also apply to a non once in a lifetime hunt?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So as far as the broken horn hunt goes, does that also apply to a non once in a lifetime hunt? So if it's what I'm thinking she means is if it's off range or a private land hunt, those are also you can shoot a broken horn or a non-broken horn, and it doesn't affect the once in a lifetime.
Yeah, yeah. So for most of the Oryx hunts that we have, the bag limit is just going to be either sex. So it's any Oryx. The only so that'd be for the once in a lifetime hunts, the off-range hunts, the private land hunts. Those are all just either sex. The only difference is the broken horn hunts that are drawn for the missile range itself. So those have a different bag limit, and it is, I think one horn has to be, 20% smaller than the other or something.
I can double check that. And I think you're gonna know this question very easily, but how would you rate Oryx as table fare?
Oh, I think it's excellent table fare. I have been told by others, well, and I've eaten it and compared it to other wild game myself, but it's very mild. So the color of it is a little more pink than red. And so it's not quite as red as elk might be. I've heard people compare it to elk a bit, but it's definitely even more mild than elk. So even people that do not like wild game tend to like Oryx because it is such a mild and tasty game meat.
And I
And
just
Tristana, I think I probably I looked up the Oryx rule, and we could perhaps go back to the question about the I think it was Iraq or Afghanistan.
perfect. Let me pull that up. I did just find for broken horn, it has to be 25%, missing a minimum of 25% of at least one horn.
Okay.
So I found that one. Okay. The Iraq Afghanistan, I'm a military guy that was lucky enough to get a once in a lifetime standard hunt. Is he still eligible for the returning overseas Iraq Afghanistan hunt?
I hope this isn't going to actually stump me again. Yeah, he is not. So those Iraq Afghanistan hunts are designated as once in a lifetime.
Okay. Okay. I think we're getting caught up on questions. I do have one about draw odds and which I didn't tell you to double check. So if you don't know off the top of your head, we can look it up. But is it better to apply as a group for a father-daughter? Is our chances better of applying alone, or is our chances good applying on the same application?
I I guess I'll try and answer it generally in that it's always going to be you're always going to have a slightly better chance applying alone in the situation where, let's say, there are 100 licenses available for a particular hunt, 99 of them have been filled, your application number comes up, your sequence number comes up, and you have two people on your that have attached to you, but there's only one slot to be filled. In that case, they're not going to fill it with you. They're going to go to the next person who is just one person. So I don't typically tend to put in with other people just because I think it doesn't really help my odds. That being said, if you really want to hunt with your daughter, for sure, put in together, definitely.
I totally agree. I wouldn't do it, but I don't know. If I was applying with a child, I think I probably would attach. There are youth only, isn't there a youth only Oryx hunt?
Yes, there are youth only Oryx hunts,
So
which
that,
it might be better draw odds for that, honestly.
yes. Okay. And can you talk a little bit about the population management hunts? And I know that those are set up a little bit differently. For those of you that don't know, this would be the fifth choice on your Oryx application. And if there is an opportunity for population management hunts, how do they work?
So we have these population management hunt options in many of our big game species, and it allows the department and some of our partners in this case, sometimes White Sands Missile Range, to target specific segments of a population. So in this case, I'll go through a couple of examples where we do run population management hunts for Oryx. So we have recently, in the last couple of years, run a population management hunt on the Jornada experimental range. So this is a range that they do a lot of range research, and so Oryx are getting more numerous on range. They restrict access, so it's not your standard public land. So we can do a population management hunt where we sort of give some certain rules and stipulations to what can happen on that particular hunt. And so we work with like the Jornada. They would like their hunters to be escorted. And so when a hunter, like somebody from the public, puts in for population management or fifth choice on their application, we will go by sequence number and contact those people that have said that they want to be on that list and offer up that hunt to them based on their sequence number. And so at that point, that hunter can choose whether or not they want to accept that hunt. So maybe the timing doesn't work for them. Maybe it sounds like a great opportunity, but they can pick whether or not they want to accept the hunt. And if they don't, then the department staff just moves on to the next person in line. And so those hunts are filled that way. And to complicate this a little bit, for Oryx, we have security badged hunts also. And those happen on White Sands Missile Range. They are designed to target Oryx harvest in secure areas. So these are areas that are more challenging to get to. They are a bit more remote, and they have to be escorted by a person with a security badge. So they're above and beyond kind of your standard population management hunt. So if folks know somebody with a security badge, they can put in for those hunts too. Those folks have kind of like a code that hunters can use to put in on their application. But they are definitely for people that have access to the missile range already. So maybe people that work on the missile range or something already have access and can go on the missile range and escort a hunter independently on their own. So they're different than the once in a lifetime hunts where a hunter will check in and check out. And that's sort of how they run safety protocols on range for those larger hunts. But these other hunts where they want to target Oryx in areas that are more remote, we have to have folks escorting each individual hunter. So that's how those run.
Okay. That makes sense. And I think I am at the end of the Oryx questions, but is there anything else that you wanted to mention about Oryx or Oryx hunting?
I really enjoy hunting them, watching them. They're kind of odd. I mean, it's different than any other species we have in North America because they're not from North America. But it is a unique opportunity to go, even if you don't hunt them, go watch them, check them out. I was on range a few weeks ago and saw a couple males fighting. They're just interesting and a cool wildlife species that we have in New Mexico. So that's all I'll add on Oryx.
That's perfect. And it spears one more thought in my mind. One of the things I've heard recently out of our Las Cruces office is that they can be seen in the Oregon mountains. And I would assume that they're like any other big game animal. And if you see them, you should keep your distance. But do you have any other tips if you are out hiking and happen upon an Oryx?
Definitely keep your distance. Yeah, I mean I haven't heard them being particularly aggressive to people, but they have two big, massive spears on their head. So, and they definitely use those against one another. So I don't think they'd hesitate to use it against something else that they felt threatened by. But yeah, keep your distance. Watch them from a distance and kind of let them do their thing. It's a little more interesting to watch them behave on their own without people present, I think, than to get real close to them and make them nervous.
Absolutely. I would imagine. I mean, we all like a little bit of space. So I would imagine their bubble's a little bit bigger than my bubble. So to jump in, I wanted to talk about Barbary next. We're getting some more Ibex questions, but we will get to them very shortly. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Barbary sheep next. And can you give us an overlap of the Barbary, where they came from, and kind of the same overview you did for Orcs?
Yeah. Yeah, so Barbary sheep are also native to Africa, more so North Africa though. They range in weight from about 100 to 300 pounds. Males are obviously larger. Both males and females do have horns, although males will have larger horns. A large horned Barbary sheep in New Mexico is going to be about 30 plus inches. Their natural predators in their homeland are wolves and lions. So again, some larger predators maybe than we have here in the range that they are currently occupying. Their history in New Mexico dates back to the 1940s, actually. I just came across some really old documents in my files where the department was actually implementing some interesting hunts in the 1940s for Barbary sheep. Very, very limited, but there were several releases of Barbary sheep starting in the 40s, I think up through maybe the 60s. But they've been established in the state ever since then. They didn't go through the normal, well, this isn't normal, so I shouldn't say that. They didn't go through any of those pinned studies that the department did for many of the other exotic species. So they weren't at Red Rock. We didn't establish them from a pinned population there. They were just released into the wild. So they do occasionally overlap range with Bighorn sheep. In particular, so Barbary sheep are more concentrated in the southeastern part of the state. That's where we have some of our draw hunts. Outside of the southeastern part of the state, they can still be found, but they're going to be in probably lower densities, depending on the area that you are. But the overlap that they have, probably the most prominent one, is with desert bighorn sheep in the western side of Unit 34. So the department a few years ago reestablished the desert bighorn sheep population on the western part of 34. That's outside of Alamogordo. Really good desert sheep country. Barbary sheep were already there, and the department decided it's good enough habitat. We would really like to reestablish bighorn sheep in their historic range there. So that bighorn sheep population numbers, I think, around 40 at the moment. So it's pretty small. But for hunters who are on the west side of Unit 34, it's pretty important to pay attention to what you might be shooting at, because that area is an over-the-counter hunt for Barbary sheep. So I think we're going to get into some of these hunt designations, but I suppose just be aware of what you're shooting at if you have a Barbary tag.
Absolutely. And Kayla talked a little bit about the differences last week when we were talking specifically about bighorn sheep, but they are a little bit different in color, and the Barbarys tend to be a little shaggier, if that's the right word. But what are some of those key differences that you should look at if you're going to be hunting Barbary sheep in that 34 where there could be an overlap with desert?
Yeah, you're right. They have different coloration, so they're more of a sandy color, and that's Barbary sheep. Bighorn sheep are going to have a white rump patch, like their whole butt is white, and then they have a white muzzle, so their nose is white. And Barbary sheep do not have that. The other thing that Barbary sheep do have, which I think is probably the most distinctive characteristic, is they are very shaggy on their front part. It looks like they're wearing chaps kind of on their front legs. So I think that's probably the most defining characteristic, because all males and females of both of those species do have horns. So you can't really fully rely on horns to tell them apart, although there are some differences in horns. But I think that shaggy hair and those patches of white on bighorn sheep are really what to look at.
And for Barbary, we have really we just have the two categories: draw hunts and over-the-counter hunts. And so, what are the differences in those two opportunities?
Yeah, so the draw hunts are where Barbary are more concentrated. So those are going to be units 29, 30, 32, part of 34, 36, and 37. So those they're kind of lumped in some there's two hunts that you can apply for, or two areas that you can apply for with some lumped game management units together. But those are going to be the areas where the highest densities of Barbary sheep occur. Um, and then we have the success rates for those are generally going to be a bit higher just because there's more of them. Outside of those draw units, we have the over-the-counter license, with the exception of some other units where we do have bighorn sheep. Like unit 17, I don't believe is included in the over-the-counter Barbary sheep tag, but I've not heard of Barbary sheep there recently anyhow. But for the most part, the over-the-counter tag is valid for the most part, almost statewide, with the exception of the draw units. So if you have an over-the-counter tag, you can't hunt the draw units. And so the success rates for the over-the-counter tag are not as high as the draw tag. That being said, they are still good, and people do still regularly find sheep and are able to harvest them. And so the bag limit for all Barbary sheep hunts it's going to be either sex. So it's whatever animal that you come upon.
And my guess is they're not going to taste as good as Oryx, but I've never tasted one. Have you?
Yeah, I have. I haven't harvested one myself, but I had a friend who let me try some of theirs, and I've heard from other folks that it wasn't great, but I didn't. I thought it was fine. It was ground meat, and I thought it was, you know, it was very good, and it was in a stew. So, but yeah, I've heard from some people that they don't like it quite as much as elk or oryx, but definitely edible.
Thank you. Um, I didn't plan on asking you that, but it just popped in my head. Okay, a couple of questions that have come in. Let me start at the beginning. I noticed on the draw odds report for Barbary sheep that the amount of tags vary greatly in a couple of areas. Are certain areas considered trophy areas, and that is why tags are limited? Also, the dates span a broad range. What is the better time of year to hunt, such as during the rut?
Yeah, good question. So we don't really have trophy areas per se in the context of you're going to definitely find really large horned males. But what we do have is the higher densities of Barbary sheep are going to be those draw hunts. So I guess just numerically, you're going to be more likely to run across a bigger male in areas where there are more Barbary sheep. And so those would be those draw hunts, those lumped hunt codes together. So the best time to hunt them, really, any time can be a good time to hunt them. They do rut in October, and so that would be a time that would be interesting to hunt them. The males might not be as wary of human predators around, perhaps, kind of like deer and elk aren't. So I guess if you were looking for a first choice, that October timeframe might be a pretty good one. And that's also why there are fewer tags in that October timeframe. Just I guess that would be considered more of a quality hunt, if you want to consider quality hunt being, you can run across animals that are rutting. That is sort of a unique opportunity to hunt them.
Very interesting. I didn't know that. I was wondering when I was reading that question if they rut year round. So, but October. And have we considered offering more tags, or are we pretty happy with the number of tags that are available for draw hunts?
Yeah, so we're in the process of this year in 2022 opening all of our big game rules and making changes to them. So we do it every 4 years, and we reassess populations at that time and determine if we should be hunting at that same level, if we should be offering fewer or more hunting opportunities. In the case of Barbary sheep, there's no really firm direction yet, but what I've been hearing is it sounds like we might look at some increases, definitely not decreases, but I think we're going to look at some increases, particularly in the southeastern part of the state.
And is that one of the rules that we're going to be opening this year, that somebody could be engaged in that process, the rulemaking process?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're opening this, it's would be called our exotics rule. So it's for Barbary Sheep, Oryx, and Ibex. I believe we're opening it in April. So at that time, we will have sort of a public outreach campaign where we'll do some public meetings, and we will open the rule for public comment in general. So if people have ideas for what they'd like to see for Barbary sheep hunting or Oryx or Ibex for that matter, I'd encourage them to pay attention to the emails that the department sends out because Tristana and her colleagues will be sending out an email letting folks know that those rules are open for comment and giving some information on how to comment and when those meetings will be.
Absolutely. So yeah, keep an eye on your emails. And then I would imagine, since most of them are kind of populated in the southeast part of the state, I have heard of them moving up into like Tucumcari and up the like Canadian River drainage area. But if somebody got an over-the-counter tag, do you have any recommendations of units where you would start looking for Barbary?
Yeah, those so similar to this is going to be a similar question to Oryx, but the since the concentration is in the southeastern part of the state, probably focusing on areas that are adjacent to those draw hunts is going to be more successful than up in the far northeastern corner of the state. Although they do show up there occasionally, probably you're going to run into them more frequently in the southeastern part of the state in those units that are adjacent to the draw units.
That would make sense. And this one has a long statement and a question in it, but Matthew mentioned that the Wild Sheep Foundation has a great presentation or had a great presentation this year on Barbary sheep. Most of the information provided by the presenter focused on Texas, not necessarily New Mexico, but we were mentioned. He asks, is New Mexico experiencing the same or similar explosive growth with Barbary sheep?
That's a great question. I don't know of the exact study that was cited, but I am familiar with some of the work that's been done in Texas and the situation that they have there. We are in New Mexico, we aren't experiencing that huge boom of Barbary numbers. And I think that is a function of the fact that we do these over the counter hunts and also draw hunts. So in Texas, there's really a lot of private land, right? And those Barbary populations are almost exclusively on private land. And access to that private land is going to be up to that particular private landowner. Whereas in New Mexico, access to public land, well, there is not serious access to public land in New Mexico. So we draw hunters and offer over-the-counter tags to make sure that Barbary populations do not get into this crazy situation where there's just hundreds or thousands on a particular mountain range.
And Matthew mentioned that video is on YouTube. It's called Everyone's Sheep Hunt. So, or Audad, Everyone's Sheep Hunt. So I'll have to check it out because I haven't heard of that one coming out either. And Jack, I saw your question in the chat about professional guide organizations in New Mexico. And I would recommend going to the Game and Fish website and use the search function to look up outfitters, and there is a whole list of everybody who is certified to be an outfitter in New Mexico. So I would definitely look in there, and you can also contact the Council of Outfitters and Guides, and they can help point you in a direction as well. But I did see that question pop up there. And we had one other question on Facebook about the McGregor Range hunt. And is there any thoughts to extending that beyond New Year's weekend, or is that limited by McGregor?
Yeah, that is limited by McGregor, but they have actually reached out to us. Actually, I just talked to them today about possibilities of increasing Barbary licenses or different hunt periods on range. So yeah, there are discussions about increasing opportunity on McGregor Range outside of just that one hunt weekend. Yes.
Right. So check that out when the rule opens.
Yes.
Okay, what have I missed about Barbary sheep, Nicole?
Oh goodness. I think you got it all, Tristana.
Okay. I'm sure there's more questions, but people know how to get a hold of us either on Facebook or shoot me an email. We'd be happy to answer more questions.
Yes.
I'm going to jump to Ibex next because we have several questions from the very beginning. We had several questions about Ibex, but let's start the same thing. Give us a little bit about the history, where you can find them, that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So ibex are native to Iran. They weigh between 80 and 150 pounds. Males are obviously on the larger end of that spectrum. Both males and females have horns, again, like all these other species we've been talking about tonight. Males in New Mexico can grow horns up to 40 to 60 inches in length, which is pretty phenomenal based on their smaller size compared to these other species. Ibex in our state were a gift from the Shah of Iran back in the 1960s and 70s. The Department of Game and Fish worked with the Albuquerque Zoo to get these animals shipped over from overseas. So similar to Oryx, Ibex had some penned studies where the department put them in some pens in Red Rock and sort of assessed how they would do in the New Mexican climate, with the plants that we have, with the weather that we have. And then they proved to be pretty hardy. And so in the 70s, we released some of the young. So we were not allowed to release the actual animals that were brought over from overseas. We had to release the young. And so we propagated some at Red Rock and then released some of those young into the wild. So there were several releases of ibex on the Florida mountains in southern New Mexico, so just south of Deming. It is the most rugged mountain range I think we have in New Mexico. It is sheer granite cliffs that ibex really thrive on. So in the wild, in their native range, their natural predators are leopards. In New Mexico, we have no leopards, but their predators are mountain lions occasionally and golden eagles, which is sort of an interesting one. I think golden eagles mostly focus on young, but eagles are pretty big and they might give some good attempts at preying upon an adult female, maybe.
Uh, so, and how big do they get? In my mind, they've always been a little bit bigger than what they are, but we have a full body mount in the Santa Fe office that I walk by every day. And I'm always amazed how small it really is. So how heavy do they get?
Yeah, they're like 80 to 150 pounds, I believe. And the males are on the bigger side. And we actually had two species of ibex that were that the department tried to establish back in several decades ago in the 70s. One was the Siberian ibex, and actually that's the one, Tristana, that you see in the office. And so it was actually a little bit bigger bodied animal than the Persian ibex, which is the one that we have currently down in the Floridas. And the Siberian ibex was released in the Canadian river drainage up in northeastern New Mexico, but it didn't do well, and that population fizzled out shortly after it was established.
Okay. And the Floridas is currently the only place where you can hunt them in New Mexico.
Yeah, you can. The Floridas is where the department is trying to maintain their population. So we don't have any goal to annihilate ibex, but we do want to maintain them on the Florida mountains exclusively. We have an over-the-counter license that would be valid for off of the Florida range. That I would not recommend people buying that unless you know of an ibex that you see. It's pretty infrequent that those licenses actually are successful at harvesting anything. But the goal is to make sure that ibex stay on the mountain range and don't go to establish in adjacent ranges that we may have bighorn sheep, for example, because there are some disease concerns that we have with ibex and bighorn sheep commingling.
Okay. Very interesting. And do you know, Dr. James Gonzalez asked how many over-the-counter ibex are harvested a year?
Oh, good question. It depends on the population size on the Florida mountains. Normally, there's not more than a handful that are harvested off range. Lately, probably one or zero are harvested off range. But when the population size is larger, there may be, 6 to 10 animals harvested off range. So it's still a small number, but it depends on the population size largely and once they get to a certain density, I think animals want to begin dispersing and finding ranges elsewhere.
Yeah, very interesting. Someday I'm gonna have to come with you on a survey so I can see one of those in person. But can you talk just a little bit about, I know we've covered over the counter quite well, and I'm assuming there's no population management hunts for Ibex, but can you talk a little bit about the draw hunts? And I know we've changed the structure a little bit in the last, gosh, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So the department has a goal, again, like I said, to maintain Ibex on the Florida mountains. We have, in order to do that, we have to harvest some female or immature animals, or what we designate as female or immature, which is horns that are less than 14 inches in length. Um, because they don't have any, well, they have predators, but human predators are the primary predator that limits their population size. So we implement a series of draw hunts is how we've done it these last several years, where people can put in for the draw, and the bag limit is a female or immature animal. Prior to that, though, we still had a goal of harvesting some female or immature animals, and we did that in a few different ways. One of which was a population management hunt, because Ibex are a small population on one mountain range. They can be a little bit tricky to get the harvest prescription correct. And so in the past, we've tried to use population management hunts to harvest female or immature animals. We moved away from that recently, and put those hunts within the draw. And we are currently looking at population data to see what the best way forward is. We've had some challenges with surveying these animals. They're so mobile and athletic, I guess, that it's really challenging. Even in a helicopter, you'd think that you'd be able to hover over them and count them easily, but it is not easy. Not by a long shot. They can hide in cracks and crevices in these cliffs. They are at dead sprints across a cliff face that you can't imagine that anything could possibly do, but they're challenging to survey and come up with with management recommendations that fit the population to maintain it on the mountain and maintain it at a certain population size. So we're working to get better at that, moving forward.
Perfect. So yeah, so I've heard it called lovingly. I think it's lovingly, anyways. One of the hardest hunts in North America, and from all the stories I hear, I would believe that to be true.
Yeah, I would as well. And one anecdote I guess that I'll add is I think regularly, maybe even every single year, there are people that rappel to get carcasses off of places that no one can actually get to without climbing and rope gear. So yeah, it's a hard hunt for sure.
I may not put in for that one this year. And we had a question about the population size of Ibex, and if we are considering adding more tags or changing the tag structure.
We so again we're opening the Ibex rule in the next couple of months, so we're actively looking at data. I do not anticipate any increases in license numbers. We have made an effort to decrease the population size in the last 3-4 years or so, and we have done so. And for that reason, and we have done that so that Ibex are maintained on the mountain and don't disperse off of the mountain. And they're maintained at a proper density on the mountain where they're not detrimentally impacting the vegetation and themselves, etc. So because the population size is smaller now, I don't anticipate any increases in licenses. There could be some changes to season dates though, and timing of hunts.
And do you know off the top of your head what the record Ibex is?
Oh, off the top of my head, I don't. I think it's around 50 inches or more, maybe. It's large.
That's, yeah, pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have one more question about exotic animals, and then I want to switch gears to a not so exotic animals for a minute. But so we've talked about Barbary, Oryx, and Ibex, and one more that we have in New Mexico is the tar. Do you have an overview of tar? Do we still have any in the state?
That is funny. I haven't heard of tar in, man, like 3 years. And just this week, somebody asked me another question about them. So I'll tell you what I do know, and that there were tar in Unit 9, a very small population. I don't know if they even reproduced. They were part of, I think, like a game farm at some point, and the fence maybe got into disarray. In any case, there was some free ranging population that was in Unit 9 at some point in time. I have not heard any reports or observations of them in the last 5 years, to be honest. So while they could be out there, I kind of doubt it because people tend to be pretty excited about when they find something weird. And I haven't heard of anything like that in the last 5 years. But that doesn't mean they're not there. Maybe it's just unlikely that they are.
Perfect. Yeah, Matthew said dang. But yeah, John, Mount Taylor Ranch now owned by the Laguna Pueblo. I've heard that as well, but I have no factual information to back that up. Okay, so Nicole, one of the questions about, for you and for everyone you work with, all of our biologists, but is there a good way for people to get information and reach out to you? And then I want to add a caveat because I know you guys are incredibly busy and in the field a lot and having rules. So I know that it can be a little bit of time before they can call people back. But what's the best way for somebody to get a hold of you or another biologist?
Yeah, our contact information is on the website in our directory. So you could call us directly or send us an email directly, or you could reach out to the information center. So it's just the general email account for our agency and ask questions. And if they can't answer those questions, they send them along to us and we can respond to those questions as well. So there's several ways to get a hold of us.
Cool. And I am happy to be a middleman if I need to. And everybody in Zoom for sure has my email address. And if we get messages on Facebook, I can help connect them. But
Yeah.
Nicole, I wanted to talk just a little bit about javelina because as I was outlining the session for tonight, I realized that we hadn't addressed it, and it's something that I think we should at least mention at some point. But the javelina populations seem to be dispersing a little bit more across the state. So where can you find javelina?
Yeah, the southwestern part of the state, or the boot heel, is the sort of the stronghold for javelina. It's where the highest densities of them are going to be. But you're correct in that we've had observations and photos sent to us of javelina in places that we might not expect them in recent years. So I think there's a decent population that might be even growing in the southeastern part of the state. In addition to that, we've had some observations sent to us from around Clovis, even in El Dorado, which is outside of Santa Fe. We've had somebody snap a photo of a javelina in their backyard. So they have definitely been showing up in places that are a bit unusual for them. I'm not sure how long that will last. They might be limited by some cold weather, which maybe in the last several years we haven't had a significant amount of, but they're definitely limited by those really cold snaps. So I wouldn't expect to see them venture too far north. But that being said, having seen them in Santa Fe, we might occasionally see them.
Around. And for as far as hunting opportunities, we do have the draw hunts and over the counter. And I'm assuming it's structured similar to what we've talked about with some of the other species. But can you talk just a little bit about those draw hunts and the over the counter opportunities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the draw hunts are in the boot heel, and that's where the highest density of javelina is going to be. And so it's probably more likely that if you get a draw hunt, you're going to run into more javelina. But we also have a over the counter with a cap. So right now it's capped at 1,000 licenses. So it's over the counter up until we hit 1,000 licenses, and then we don't sell anymore. But that's for all of the other parts of the state outside of the boot heel. And so that success rate has been increasing in New Mexico over the last 3 or 4 years. And so for that reason, I think that we probably are getting higher densities of javelina in maybe like the southeastern part of the state. And so they're still really good. I think it's like a 40% success rate for that over the counter tag, which is about the same as it is for the boot heel tag. So I think both of those licenses could be really good and fun and successful for people.
I know I enjoyed hunting them growing up. I haven't hunted them here in New Mexico yet, but I remember growing up hunting them and enjoyed the experience. It was always warm and comfortable. And
Yeah, I've heard a lot of feedback of people being extremely into javelina hunting because they have terrible eyesight, so you can get pretty close to them and get a shot. And so I think even archery hunters are particularly into them because you can get so close and new archery hunters especially. So
okay, a couple of questions that came in while we were talking, and I know we didn't spend a lot of time on that, but if you guys have questions out there, let us know, and we'll help answer some more direct questions. Nicole, do you know if you have to have a license to shoot tar if you do see one?
tar, if you saw one, I do not believe they are protected species. We had a blurb in our rules and info booklet many years ago, maybe like 6, 8 years ago, about tar, and I want to say that they are not a protected species. So I do believe you would be able to just shoot one.
Okay. And then do you know any names or addresses of organizations that would take wild game meat? Maybe that's a question for the health department, but do you know of any off the top of your head?
Yeah, the department works with Hunters for the Hungry, I think is the organization. And I think that hunters can donate their meat to some certain processing game processing places, and then that meat is then donated to folks who are less fortunate or homeless or food banks or whatever. So there are mechanisms. I don't exactly know all of them, but they are out there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I'll keep an eye for any more questions that come in. But the last question that I have for you is, if somebody calls you, and I know you get these calls all the time, and looking for tips and how to get started if they want to hunt in New Mexico for an exotic species or for any of the big game species. And what's your number one tip for somebody who's just getting started and wants to get out there and go hunting?
Oh man, I would if try and find somebody that is a friend or an acquaintance that already hunts. Typically people that do hunt are very enthusiastic about it and willing to share lots of stories and information and be prepared to hear a ton of their old hunting stories from their past. But that'd be a really great opportunity. Pay attention to webinars like these, get involved with, shooting organizations that are local to you to meet up with folks who do this. But maybe the biggest thing, and I didn't grow up hunting. I began hunting as I was a 20-something-year-old, and so it was a bit daunting. But what helped me most was just getting out there and doing it and trying my best and looking for pointers online or from friends or people that do it, and just giving it a shot. I mean, it took me a while to actually harvest something, but I guess that wasn't ultimately my point. It's just fun to be out in the field and see wildlife. And if you do end up harvesting something, it's sort of a bonus. But yeah, those would be my pointers.
Great. I totally agree. I think once you're out there, you learn so much more about the animal and how they move and their characteristics and their habits, if you will. And you just learn so much more about them being out there and trying to get in close to them. So the last question I had that came in while you were talking, Nicole, about Ibex is one of the participants has heard from some guides that the Ibex population is getting really low, and if that's concerning at all to you or to the biologist.
So yeah, the population definitely has declined, and that was on purpose. So we did have a goal of decreasing the population to some extent. Um, at this point, the population is a bit lower than we would like. And so for that reason, we adjusted female immature licenses and we decreased those by, I want to say 75 or 80%. And so there used to be 300 of them. Now there are only 80. So we're not concerned about persistence of ibex on the mountain necessarily. I mean, if you think of back in the 70s when the population was established, I think they started from certainly less than 100 animals and grew in the course of several years to, be hundreds to, the largest observation I've seen is over 1,000 animals on the mountain range. So they definitely have a high reproductive potential. The females give birth to two young, and they can definitely take advantage of good weather and forage conditions. So, given that, the population itself is not in any way going to crash and blink out. That's not going to happen for ibex, and it's not the goal of the department either. What we do have a concern about at the moment is we have quite a few males, and so the sex ratio is skewed. We'd rather have more females than males because one male can breed many females, and this is sort of how we manage all of our other hooved mammals. Is we usually have fewer males than females, and so we're going to try to address the sex ratio issue, but the number of ibex on the mountain, while it is lower, it isn't at a point where we are concerned about their persistence.
Thank you for answering that. And I think that's all the questions. So I will wrap everything up here for tonight. And I believe this is webinar 14 in our 15-part series. So we're getting close to the end, but I want to thank everybody for joining us both here in the Zoom platform and on Facebook. And again, quick reminders that next Wednesday at 5 p.m. is the draw deadline. So don't delay. Even if you are not ready to apply quite yet, log into your account, make sure you have your username and password, and if that doesn't need reset, and if it does, contact us sooner rather than later. I was helping with phones today, and at times we had waits of 45 minutes to an hour. So don't delay. If you need help from us, do it sooner rather than later, and definitely don't miss that March 16th deadline at 5 p.m. Next Monday, we are going to be talking to Colleen, and we have no planned topic. We're going to be just answering questions. If anybody has questions about how to apply or draw odds or any of that, we don't have a biologist scheduled to join us, but we will be answering as many questions as we can. So make sure and fill that out. Yes, we do have to have the harvest report. So if you have a deadline of March 16th, if you haven't done most of the species, you will have a late fee with those. And then if you have a Barbary Sheep, Ibex, Oryx, Javelina, or a trapper's license, you have until April 7th to get those done, because some of those hunts do go through the end of March. So keep that one in mind as well. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. Nicole, I really appreciate all of your time and you being here this evening. So thank you.
No problem. Thanks everybody for the great questions.
Yep. All right. Have a great evening.